Lekutei Sichos Chelek Yud Ches Matos Aleph. A very geschmack Rashi Sicha on this story with the Eitzah, the advice that Bilam gives to Moav in a way to be able to destroy the Eden. And in the pasuk that we're talking about today, in the context of this pasuk, is after the Milchama with Midian, when the soldiers, or those who went to war, allowed the females to remain alive. Moshe Rabbeinu was upset. He's upset. Hachisim kol nekeva. How could you leave the women alive? These are the ones that caused the Yidden to rebel against Hashem. Bidvar Bilam, according to the words of Bilam. So Rashi quotes these words Bidvar Bilam with the words of Bilam, and Rashi explains as follows. Omar Lahem, Bilam said to them, to the Mayavim, even if you will gather all of the masses, all of the multitudes of the world, or all of the nations of the world, you will not be able to overpower the do you think that you're more than the Mitzrayim? Who were 600 choice of the best chariots, and they couldn't do it. Of course you can't do it. Come, and I will give you advice. And the advice is the Eibishter, the God of these of the Yidden, abhors promiscuity, chulu, and then the Sifri over there continues. So why don't you get your wives and daughters to become available for Zima with the Yidden? And Rashi concludes, K'di'isa b'chelik u'b'sifri, as this is said, as it is written in Chelek, which is Perek Chelek in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, u'b'sifri, and in Sifri. Now, just for the sake of context, the Gemara in Chelek, Perek Chelek that is, talks about, not so much about this Eitzah of Bilam, but it actually discusses, and it will be brought down in the Sikha later on, what kind of trickery the Moavim used, the Neshei Moav, the Neshei Ubnais Moav used in order to lure the Yidden into their trap. And the Gemara over there says that they made these booths from which they were selling pishtan, like linen garments. They had an older woman outside the booth and a younger woman inside the booth. And when the Yidden ate and drank and were happy and they went for a stroll in the street, they went to this marketplace, and the older woman standing there offers them to buy clothes. And she gives them a price. So the younger woman that's inside the booth offers a better price. And this happens 3 times. The older one gives a price, the younger one gives a better price, until finally the person goes into the booth to make a deal. And the younger woman who's there makes him feel comfortable and calls him a ben bayis, I think, and gives him wine to drink. This is before wine of Goyim was not allowed. And then he drinks the wine, and a fire burns inside of him, a fire of a taiva, of desire. And then she pulls out her idol, and she says, if you want to be with me, you're going to have to serve my idol. And the Gemara continues the back and the forth. He says, I'm a Yid, and so on and so forth. So the Gemara in Chelek discusses what kind of elaborate scheme was used to trick the Yidden into both Gilui Arayis and Avodah Zarah, or Baal Aramis and Avodah Zarah. Sifri, if you look in the Sifri on this pasuk, then Sifri on this pasuk is the source of where Rashi takes it from, and the end of it, after these words, the Sifri ends with the words, prepare your wives and your daughters for znus, and etc., which is basically the end of Bilam's Eitzah. So this is the Rashi. So the Rashi on our pasuk. Now, Rashi already told us this. last week, 2 weeks ago, in Parshas Balak, Rashi already told us that Bilam gave this Eitzah. So the first thing we have to understand is why is Rashi telling this to us again? So that's what Rashi the fact that Rashi explains over here that this was Bilam's advice. Over Rashi already told this to us in Parshas Balak. From Bilam the on Bilam's words, come, let me give you advice. And also on the pasuk that the nation began to act immorally with the daughters of Moav is move on. It's understood why it has to say it again. Varum unser pasuk is the marker from Vanet Melantis Ares, because our pasuk Bidvar Bilam is the source from where it's learned and therefore taught in Parshas Balak. Rashi Zog when the pasuk L'Chayatzcha, Rashi himself says over there in Parshas Balak on the words L'Chayatzcha, Teida, a proof Sheibilam Hisi Eitzazu, that Bilam gave this Eitzah Lachshilam Bezima, to make them stumble with promiscuity. Like the pasuk says that these women were the ones who stood up to the Yidden according to the advice of Bilam, the words of Bilam. So therefore we know that this pasuk is the source, the makir of this this fact that Bilam gave the Eitzah, and therefore, even though we already know it already, because Rashi told us in Balak, Rashi says it again here because this is where it comes from. However, we do have to understand some things over here. First of all, why does Rashi have to tell us the whole elaborate version? That he said to them that even if you gather all the people of the world and that you're not stronger than the Mitzrayim, and in two details that why this elaboration seems superfluous over here. Number one, Aleph, the pasuk over here is talking about the fact why Moshe was upset that they let them live. So he should have said they caused the sin. How they got to it, how Bilam gave this Eitzah, doesn't seem to add anything to the understanding of the pasuk. Base. As Rashi if Rashi does for some reason want to bring the discussion of Bilam, not just the Eitzah, zu bringen das dort, wo ist mefarish dem Inyan zum ersten Mal. It would have been more appropriate to bring it the first time, where Rashi speaks about this on the words L'Chayatzcha, and he explains the Eitzah. So he should have explained how the Eitzah came about. How did Bilam convince them? So if there's a need to tell us the whole story, the story should have been earlier on, it told to us earlier on in Parshas Balak. So the question is, how does all this lengthy description of what happened in Bilam's discussion, how does it add to the understanding of our pasuk here in Parshas Matos? We also have to understand various nuances in the words of Rashi. We're going to have 5 questions on the Rashi. Aleph. And in a sense, we're going to take each little bit of Rashi, we're going to go through, and we're going to ask on each line of Rashi another question. And I did make a chart again, like I've done the last few weeks, where I take the Rashi, the question on the Rashi, and the answers on the Rashi, and it will, as Hashem, be on the website. Aleph, for question number 1. Das was Bilam got gesagt, afilu atam machnisim kol hamoynish shebe'olam, ein atam yichelim lahem. Bilam says that even if you gather all of the people of the world, or all of the masses of the world, you will not be able to overcome them. Vayil, because Shema merubim atam in Mitzrayim, because you, Me'avim, are not any greater than the Mitzrayim. Is the proof is not connected to the discussion. You yourselves, if you're talking just to the Mayavim, may not be more than the Mitzrayim, than the Egyptians. But if you gather all the people of the world, then you would be more than the Mitzrayim. But in the Mitzrayim, the Mitzrayim were one nation. As big as Egypt was, the numbers of Egypt were in that time, they're still going to be less than all of the masses, than all of the multitudes of the world. So he starts to talk about Kalamoinus. Then he brings a raya from Mitzrayim, that you're not any more than the Mitzrayim. It's true that the Mayavim are not more than the Mitzrayim, But how does that answer, how does that prove that even if you brought in Kol HaMoinish Sheba'olam, that you wouldn't be able to overcome them? Nachman. Additionally, we learned earlier in Parsha Shlach, after the story of the Meraglim, when the Eibusher wanted to destroy all of the Yidden. Moshe says to Hashem, the Goyim are going to think, the nations are going to think, that Hashem cannot successfully bring the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael. That's Canaan. And the people are going to say, you can't compare one Paroi to 31 kings in Canaan. So certainly you can't compare Paroi to all of the peoples of the world. So, how is Hashem Merub Matim and Amitzrim proving that even if you bring in all the people of the world, you wouldn't be successful? So that's our first question. It doesn't seem to flow. You're saying a statement, you're bringing a proof, but the proof does not help understand the statement. Beis li'idach. On the other hand, since seemingly he's trying to describe the strength and the multitudes of the Mitzrayim, why does Rashi just say there were 600 choice chariots? And the pasuk is Messiah and doesn't even mention, as that very pasuk concludes, that there were a whole bunch of chariots and officers and so on and so forth. It's Visis Muvanech Bepashtus, and it's understood simply as Nor Ribui Mufluk from Nechav Mitzrayim. Only an incredible number of Egyptian chariots at Yeket Nachyagin would be able to pursue and bring out such a level of fear by 600,000 men, excluding the Eid of Rav. If you have 600,000 men, plus women, plus children, plus Eid of Rav, and you have 600 wagons, that's not going to cause the panic, the Vayiru Moed that it caused. Clearly there was much more than 600. So why does Rashi just mention the 600 if he's trying to prove the strength and the numbers of Mitzrayim? So you may want to explain, as mit sheish me yisrechav bachur vil Rashi madgiz zayin nid dem dozik in misper for sich, nor as the sheish me is an again the rechav bachur. Maybe you could say that we're saying the 600. Rashi is not emphasizing the number 600. He's emphasizing that these 600 were the special forces. Because der Fun ist verstandig, wie groß ist gewesen die Zoll von ganz Chel Berachem Mitzrayim. That if they had 600 special forces, then it must mean that the whole army, the whole Egyptian military was much greater. Maybe that's what Rashi means. He's saying that just their special forces were 600. Is as but it doesn't fully answer the question. Rashi should have alluded to that by saying the word v'gomer, etc. There was 600 echav bachor plus all the other things mentioned in the pasuk. Not to say the term that they were 600. Was gitan arzumeinin as das es gewen sehr ganzer misper, which implies that this was everything that they were. Now another lashon, there could have been another lashon. For example, they could have said shahayo lohem sheish meyes. They had 600. Al derech v'yin sifri, or like the Sifri says, the Sifri says vayikach sheish meyes. They took 600, which means that this is one of the things that they took. They could have taken other things too. Von welcome is all can verstehen as they make maybe the doesn't give misper. So Rashi could have, if it didn't say the goymer, at least not use the word shahayu and use another term that would let us know that there was more than just 600. So the bottom line, the question is, what is Rashi trying to tell us, or the Medrash, what is Rashi trying to tell us by the proof of the sheish meyis rechav bachor? What is that adding on here if it's only really 600 and there's absolutely not even a remez, not even a hint to any of the other parts of the Egyptian military? Gimel, the third question, was is the lashon boyu vasi achametza? Come and I will give you this advice. What does boyu mean? Dalet, question 4. And here, Dalet and Hey, the Rabbi is going to address the Kedeisa b'chelik u'b'sifri. And there's two parts. Dalet and Hey. In Dalet, Rashi is Meisef v'chulu Kedeisa b'chelik u'b'sifri, etc. As it's written in Chelik and in Sifri. Seemingly the reference of the word v'chulu is referring to divided the kepratia inyan, wie sie seinen da in Perek Chelek und in Sifri. Referring to more details on this topic as spoken about in these two places, in Perek Chelek in Sanhedrin, and in the Sifri, is nicht Muban. Was ist der Negeya der Arichas Adiburim in Chelek? Uns ist nicht genug zum Mitzayen sein, zum Hemshech, was steht in Sifri. What is Perek Chelek adding on? Normally the Sifri, we already started the Sifri. The Rashi is quoting from the Sifri. So you could have said, look in the Sifri. You want to get more details, look in the Sifri. What are the details of Perek Chelek, which, as I mentioned before, the Perek Chelek addresses the elaborate scheme of the Moavim. Why is that negaya to the pasuk? What is it adding on? What does Rashi want to tell us with the reference to Perek Chelek? Hey, the next detail. Afilu when Rashi will bring an eich von Chelek, even if Rashi for some reason does want to send us to look in Perek Chelek to understand more about what happened, hat doch gedacht, maktem sein dem Zion von Sifri. Then he should have first brought the reference from Sifri and then Chelek. So it's like the Isa bis Sifri ube Chelek. Why? Because Aleph dort retzich behemshach habir von unser pasuk. First of all, that Sifri is not our pasuk. So if we're learning Perek Lamed Aleph Pasuk Tazayin in Parshas Matos, you're sending me to the Sifri, I'll get more of understanding in our Pasuk. Rashi is here to explain this Pasuk. Beis, von dorten ist genommen geworden der ganze Dibber von Rashi. Eichas Chalase. That Sifri is the source of this Rashi. The beginning of Rashi. Amar lamafilu atam achnisim v'chulu. Dagegen in Chelek is the Arichas Apratim not in Hemshach zu Alekeim shel Elu Senezimahu. When in Perek Chelek it doesn't discuss how Bilam convinced the Moavim to do this trick. It says that he told them and it goes to tell us what they did. So the question is not why is Chelek before Sifri. The question is going to be in the next paragraph. It must mean that Rashi means a different Sifri. Von dem ist Muchach, das was Rashi sagt, diese Sifri, meint nicht mit Zayin sein, dem Mocker von Ascholas Pirushei, Amar Amafilu Atem. Rashi is not intending to send us to the source of his Pirush, which is the Sifri on this pasuk. Ve'atam, weil das ist Muchach from pasuk Alem Pshuti Shel Mikra, because the more details is obvious from the Pshuti Shel Mikra. The Yidden sinned with Bnei Ismayav. Bidvar Bilam. So once we know that Bilam told them on the cave, we know the rest of the story. So therefore, Rashi does not mean the Sifri in our pasuk, on our pasuk. Und euch nicht auf die Prati adiburim behemshich zu alekeim shel elu sei nezimahu was die Prati eitz of Bilam seinen dein Chelek. Nor do we need to know the details in continuation to alekeim shel elu sei nezimahu, which all of the details are mentioned in Chelek. Because it's mentioned in Chelek, so obviously it's not the part of the Sifri that we need. No, was ist verbunden mit dem, was es redt sich b'Chelek, the Hainu in Klala Inyan von der Lekeim Shel Zimahu. The Sifri that Rashi is referring to is a Sifri that would be connected to Chelek, to Perek Chelek, which is discussing the idea of a Lekeim Shel Zimahu, not so much the pratim that are already in Chelek, but other pratim that we need to know that will help us understand Perek Chelek. So just to repeat this question, hey. For some reason, Rashi says first Perek Chelek and then Sifri. Now, seemingly, if the Sifri meant the Sifri on our pasuk, then the Sifri should have been first. Number one, because on our pasuk. Number two, because that's the source of Rashi. From the fact that Sifri comes second, it must mean that Rashi does not mean the Sifri on our pasuk. First of all, the details in the Sifri are superfluous. We understand them already from Pshuti Shel Mikra. And second of all, we're putting Sifri after Chelek. So anything that the Sifri tells us that's already in Perek Chelek, we don't need. So there must be a Sifri that tells us something more on the topic of Alekeim Shel Elu Sei Nezimahu, or in the general idea of this topic, that is going to help us understand the Gemara in Perek Chelek, that's going to help us understand our pasuk, and that's the Sifri that Rashi is referring to. So the question is, which Sifri is that? What is Rashi referring to when he sends us to look it up in Sifri? So these are our questions. First of all, what's the Arichas and Rashi? Why does Rashi? What's the connection between Kol Hamayim Sheba'ilam and Shem Merubi Mata Mina Mitzriyim? Why does Rashi only mention the Sheish Me'esarechav Bachur? Why does it say Boyu V'asiyachem Eitza? What is Perek Chelek adding to what Rashi already told us? And which Sifri are we talking about? And what is it adding to what we already know until this point? These are our questions on this Rashi. And in Seif Gimel, he's going to begin the Biur on Rashi. Der Biur Bazeh. Der Chilik bepashtes. Zwischen dem Pasuk in Parshas Seinu und dem Pasuk in Parshas Balak. So, one of the things he pointed out in the question was that maybe if this elaborate part of the Pirush is necessary, it should have been in Balak, Parshas Balak, on the words L'cha Yatzcha. So he says like this: one of the differences that you find in the pasuk in our parsha, Parshas Matos, and the pasuk in Parshas Balak, where it says L'cha Yatzcha, in Parshas Balak state L'cha Yatzcha, come or go, and I'll give you an eitzah, I'll give you a piece of advice. The Rebbe is Rashi Mefarish. Therefore Rashi explains, nor umaria eitzah, what is the advice that Bilam gave them? Because it says the word i'atzcha, so the question is, what's the eitzah? The answer is that to involve the Yidden in znus, in promiscuity. Da kegin in the pasuk of Parshas Seinu state nit ba'atzaz Bilam nor bidvar Bilam. It doesn't just say on Bilam's advice; it says on Bilam's words. Is mashma sozami mit der eitzah is eich kven advar. So this implies that together with the advice of Bilam, there was also a dvar, a word, a discussion. A dibur von Bilam was at gehat hashayches to the eitzah. There was a discussion with Bilam that was connected to the eitzah. He didn't just say, "Here's my eitzah." There was more of a discussion that led to the eitzah, because it says bidvar Bilam. Und von dem was da steht beshayches to Tainis Moshe. And because it says the words bidvar Bilam in connection to Moshe's complaint, why did they not kill the women in the war? Is muchach as the dvar Bilam is negiyah dafkeda. From this we can understand that the words of Bilam, the discussion of Bilam, is relevant to here, to this pasuk, more or not so much to L'cha Yatzcha. Und der Rebbe is Rashi Mefarish, nicht nur die Eitzah von Bilam, nor echt der Dvar Bilam, and therefore Rashi doesn't just tell us what the advice was, but he also tells us what the discussion was. He said to them, that even if you gather all of the masses of the world, you won't be able to overcome them. Which is led to Bilam's advice of that the Eibishter despises promiscuity. So before we explain how they connect, let's understand what we're saying. We're saying that that Rashi understands from the fact that it says bidvar Bilam that more than just an eitzah, there was a discussion. And the fact that it says it here bidvar Bilam and not over there means that there's something in the understanding of Moshe's taina that is, we have to know not just Bilam's eitzah, we also have to know Bilam's discussion. The Azbar Bazeh. And now we're going to explain this. Tainas Moshe, hachayisim kol nekeva, hein hayu levnei Yisrael gemer, al dvar pa'er, v'ti amagefa b'adas Hashem, that you let live all of the females. These are the ones that caused the Yidden to sin with the dvar pa'er, with the getchke, with the idol of pa'er, and this brought about the magefa on the Eibishter's people. Is given nicht nur der Fall, was sie haben overmachshel given Eden, ungebracht im Agefe. It's not something that happened in the past, and in the past they caused the Eden to stumble and brought about a plague that caused so many Eden to die. Sometimes you could say, no, we have no reason to keep them alive because in the past they hurt us. That's not what Moshe is saying. Die Taine is given b'shayches to der Milchama was mat geführt itzt mit Midian. He was referring to this very war that they were leading, that they were having against Midian. Und der Fahr is vayikzef Moshe ab kudi echayil v'gemer. Haboy mitzvah Milchama. The Moshe was angry at the officers of the war, at those who were coming back from the war. Das heißt, das was die Midyanim haben geschickt bin Isaiam Liznus or Liznois, the fact that the Midyanim sent their daughters to bring promiscuity amongst the Yidden is given an oifen wie sie haben haben mit Eden und sie umbringen nach Manelsland. This was how they went to war. This was how they wanted to destroy the Eden, by sending out the Bnei Ismael. Das ist Tage gewend Dvar Bilam. This was a discussion of Bilam. And this is what Bilam was telling them. Mit Milchama Gashmis kann man die Eden nicht Menatzeach sein. With physical warfare, with conventional warfare, you will not be able to win over the Eden. Because even if you bring all of the people of the world, you can't win them. Und der Rebbe ist was Yachem Eitza. Let me give you the Eitza. The Eitza that the Eibishter despises promiscuity. Kommt ois, and therefore they sent out the Bnei Ismael, as die Bnei Midian haben euch geführt bepeil die Milchama von Midian gegen die Eden. The Bnei Ismael were the warriors. They were the ones who were going to war, not with guns and conventional battlefare, but they were going with their with the zima, the promiscuity that they were bringing as a way of winning a war. And that's why the discussion of Bilam is necessary, because by understanding how Bilam came to this Eitzah, we understand that they wanted war. If they were able to bring Kol HaMoyni Sheba'ilam and bring all the armies of the world and fight against the Yidden, they would have done that. But they couldn't, because it wouldn't help. So they found another war tactic that would work. So Moshe is saying, now that we know Dvar Bilam, now that we understand how the Eitzah came about, we understand that when you went to war, these were your enemies. How could you leave them alive? So by understanding the Dvar Bilam, we understand Moshe's Taina. And that's what the Torah says over here, Dvar Bilam. And that's what Rashi over here elaborates and explains what the Dvar Bilam was, because it helps us understand the Taina of Moshe, HaChayisim Kol Nekeva. And in Sif Dalid, we're going to go through the details in Rashi, Sif Dalid and Hey. We're going to go through the details of Rashi and understand how this discussion went about. But we already understand, at this point, we already understand the basic answer. Our main answer was, why is the Arichas here? How does it help the Pasuk? And why is it here and not there? That we already answered. At least in a general sense. Very simple. Here we're trying to understand Moshe's Tainach, Yisim Kol Nekeva. And there's a Chiddush over here, that it's not just something that happened in the past. You're going to war. Who are you going to war with? You're going to war with Bnei Ismael. They are your enemy. How could you leave them alive? Now that we understand what Bilam was trying to do, we understand why Moshe was so upset about it. And Al Pi Zeh, Sif Dalid, is move on Farvas Rashi bring the Prati Adir from Bilam, and now you can understand why Rashi brings the details of Bilam as well. Omar Lohem, even if you bring all the people of the world, you won't be able to overcome them. As we'll see in a moment, in our question Aleph of Tziv Beis, we said Shema Merubim Atam and Amitzdim doesn't seem to be a raya to Kol HaMoyni Sheba'ilam. He says it's not. We'll see what that means in a minute. But for now, we have to understand that the idea that Bilam was saying that if you bring all the multitudes of the world, you will not be able to overcome the Yidden. For this, Bilam does not need a raya. As Balak already saw, as a Philosichin ve'oig, even Sichin and oig, the starkste Melachim was ein kol Adam yachal lekavsham, the strongest, most powerful kings, that no other person is able to conquer them. And those who were hired to protect the other nations from the Yidden, haben die Yidden sie beigekommen, and as a nifla dicken Eufen, the Yidden overcame them in such an incredible way, as die ganze Gewurde von Sichin ve'oig hat kein Batref nicht gehabt, that the entire strength, the power of Sichin ve'oig was totally insignificant. Weisen sie doch schein as a Gewurde Gashmis, so now they know that physical strength, Sayin Ibi Bekamus, whether you're talking about quantitatively, a lot of people, or whether you're talking about qualitatively, special forces, strong soldiers that need help enough to buy the Yidden. This will not help to overcome the Yidden. So that's number one. Bilam says to them, listen, if you're talking about conventional warfare, strength, numbers, soldiers, not going to help you. So Balak and the Midianites had a different idea. We'll win the Yidden through a spiritual war. Das heißt, auf denselben Stege, wie sie haben gedungen, Bilam zu vertreiben die Jiden, just like they, in the same manner that they hired Bilam to chase the Jiden away, as they come and curse these people, mit dem ruchnistigen Kerch, was got with the spiritual strength that he had. Zayin dik anovi yedei das Elyon, because he was a prophet, who knew the das of Hashem, as they haben sie euch nach dem. When Bilam hat sie nicht gekannt helfen, so afterwards, when they realized that Bilam can't help them, they still thought to themselves, zu aufsuchen andere Menschen mit mehr ruchnistische Starkheit und Kirches, als zu beikommen die Jiden. We have to find someone who's better than Bilam. Someone who has more spiritual strength, more spiritual powers than Bilam does, and that way they'll overcome the Yidden. They knew that they can't do Gashmias. Maybe Beruchnias. They tried Bilam didn't work. Maybe they could find another person that is even more powerful spiritually than Bilam. Avdem at the Bilam Ganfer, therefore Bilam said to them, Shema merubim atem min amitznim, so you sheis me esrechav bachur. Are you more than the 600 Mitzrayim, who were 600 choice chariots, best chariots? Then Bilam was not trying to emphasize the number 600. The Gashmis, the Kegvuru, and Ribui von Chel Mitzrayim, the physical strength and the physical numbers of the Egyptian military. Nor the Ruchnis, the Kegvuru. He was trying to bring out that the Mitzrayim also had spiritual power. Und wie Rashi is mefarish, as the Behemoths are Rechev, Zainin Geven, Yodis Var Hashem. That the animals that these chariots were riding with were from those who were afraid, fearful of the word of Hashem. This is going back to the Makkah of Dever, when Moshe told the Mitzrayim that whoever is afraid of Hashem should bring their animals indoors, and that way they will be saved from the Makkah of Dever. And those who didn't listen, those who didn't care about the words of Hashem, left their animals outside, and the animals were died in the Makkah of Dever. But those who were Yodei Yisrael Hashem, those who were on a level enough to be afraid, to listen to the word of Hashem, their animals were saved, and therefore they had animals to be able to go to war against the Yidden. So you're talking about the important thing is the Yodei Yisrael Hashem. And he brings in the order that even though all the animals, not just the Sheish Meis, all the animals were from the Yodei Dvar Hashem, but by saying Bachur, these were within the Yodei Dvar Hashem, these were the best of the Yodei Dvar Hashem. And also he references the Sicha Chelek Tezayin that we learned, Toiv Sheben Nechashim Haroig. So the idea over here is that Bilam is referencing the Mitzrayim does not negate the Ribui Mispar for Chel Mitzrayim. He doesn't have to emphasize the number of the Egyptian military. He's emphasizing the fact that they were people who had Yiras Hashem within the level of a Mitzri. Und Afal das nicht geholfen. Nevertheless, it didn't help. Und B'shazeh haben sich angeheben mit Yidden, and when they started up with the Yidden, haben euch sehr gehabt a bitter in Sof. They also had a bitter end. Und Mele is moving, therefore it's understood, says Bilam, als es hat nicht kein Ort zu suchen, als solche, was haben eine ruchnistige Meile und durch sie beikommen Yidden, to find someone that has higher spiritual level and utilize their powers to overcome the Yidden, weil in dem Ingen sei es nicht berufen mit Mitzrayim, because on this level they are not any greater than the Egyptians, but seinen given Yodei Yisrael Hashem, who were afraid of the word of Hashem, und haben doch gar nicht gekannt gegen Yidden, and yet could not do anything against the Yidden. So we now understand that in our question we didn't understand the connection between Now we understand that it's two different statements, addressing two different details. Is addressing physical strength and saying that no physical strength in the world can overcome the Yidden. And the Sheish Me'eserech of Bachur is addressing spiritual strength, that even spiritual strength cannot overcome the Yidden. So that's what Bilam was telling them. You can't overcome them physically, you can't overcome them spiritually. Was can you helfen? So what could they do? Hat sie Bilam gesagt, Bayu v'asi achem etza. Come and I will give you advice. And if you remember, one of our questions was, why did he say Bayu? So he says, Bayu means kum zu nenter, come closer. Und ich will euch geben an etza bachashoy, and I will give you an advice, but in a secret, quietly. That because the Eibishter despises promiscuity, this is how you will be able to fulfill your cause, what you want to do. So now we understand most of the Rashi. Rashi was addressing Dvar Bilam because we have to understand the time of Moshe, why he's so upset about Achisim Kol Nekeva. And we see that the Bnei Yisrael were part of the war, which is why Moshe is so upset. And then and he explains that the Bilam told the Mayavim, Balak and Midian. He said you can't fight them physically because Kol HaMayne Shebaylam won't overcome them. You already saw that was Sichin and Noik. You can't fight them spiritually because even the Mitzrayim who were Yarei Zvar Hashem couldn't either fight the Yidden. The only advice I have for you, and I have to do it in a secret, is Elekayim Shalelu Seinazima. So now we still have to understand in Rashi the Kedisa B'Chelik U'B'Sifri. We also have to understand why it had to be in a secret. Why did it have to be B'Chashoy? Why did this advice have to be in a secret? And these two questions will answer each other in Seif Hey. The Mechamis can still ask, when gefit nit in die ganze Arbaim schon aber mit beras die Eden zon Tana Zelcha Avedas, this type of Aveda, the Aveda of the Zima, the promiscuity, the immoral acts with B'nai Mayav, this, we don't find any such similar Avedas in the Midbar. Nachmer, by Shleimis Bas Divri, sagt Rashi, in the case of Shleimis Bas Divri, who was the mother of the person who was Mekalal as Hashem, this is the praise of the Yidden, that she was the only such woman in all of the Yidden. Obviously, if it's a Shvachon Shal Yisrael that she's the only one, then obviously that includes the men as well. That there was no other person involved in this type of conduct, not from the men, not from the women, besides for Shleimus Bas Divri. So this was something that was totally foreign to them. And wie kommt das, as sehr viel Eden sollen dem nicht so werden? How is it possible that so many Eden should stumble and fall in this Aveda, bis as vayi amesim b'magefa arbo ve'esnim olav, to the point that there were 24,000 people that died in the Magefa. This is what's bothering the Ben Chamis Mikra. Like it doesn't make sense. These are Yidden, they're holy people. They did some things wrong along the way. But this is a whole new low. How do we get there? Oich. Additionally, was is their boyu? What is the reason for the boyu, for the quiet? Why did Bilam have to say it as a secret? The Rebbe brings Rashi Kedisa B'Chelek, and therefore Rashi brings. Remember, our question was, what is Perek Chelek adding? Here, why does Rashi mention Perek Chelek? So now we understand that Rashi brings Perek Chelek, was dort wird herumgeredet mit Proteus, wie Zeumen hat die Eden reingenarrt, durch Tzartzuri Shal Yayin. Over there in Perek Chelek, it discusses in detail how the Yidden were fooled, were tricked in to doing this Aveda through the wine that they were given to drink, to the point that they stumbled and fell both in acts of promiscuity and in acts of Avodah Zarah. So first of all, you're asking the question, Ben Chamis Mikra, how did they fall? They were tricked. There was a whole, like I mentioned before, from the Modern Perek Chelek, there was a whole scheme with the older woman on the outside, the younger woman on the inside. They came in to do business, they were given some wine, and they fell. But at least we understand how it happened. And this also explains why it had to be in a secret. If the Yidden would have found out about this, they would have been very careful. Der Rebbe hat gesagt, as Eden soll sich nicht wissen von der Armumis hatachbula. Therefore, Bilam says it has to be a secret, so the Yidden should not discover this cunning strategy, this shrewd, sly approach that was going to trick them and lure them into this Aveda. So we understand now also why Perek Chelek is introduced into Rashi. Number one, to explain that there was a major scheme over here that lured the Yidden in. And this is why it says Boyu. This is why it was a secret, because if it was this type of trick, if the Yidden would find out about it, then the trick wouldn't work. The last thing we have to understand is why Rashi, which Sifri is Rashi bringing and why does he bring it? And it says, and the reason why we have to do this is because we have one last question. The Gemara tells us how Bilam's Eitzah, how Bilam's advice was fulfilled. Also, learn kloim. They made kloim are curtains. So they made these like enclosures, booths out of curtains. Chelek ad beisa yeshimis. And in these booths, they put zaynis. An older woman on the outside, the and a younger woman on the inside. When the Yidden were eating and drinking and rejoicing, and they were going out to stroll in the marketplace. So the older woman would say, would you like to buy some clothing? And then it would go to the younger one, and so on and so forth. So one could still ask, so if someone opens up the Gemara and Perek Chelek and looks it up and sees how this cunning strategy worked, they're going to ask a question. How is it possible that the Yidden should conduct themselves in this way, that they should eat and drink and be merry, and then go out to stroll in the marketplace amongst the tents of the women of Midian? Especially after these great nisim that occurred. First, they just experienced first by Esher and Nechalim. Esher and Nechalim are the two mountains that were very close to each other, and the Meridian wanted to ambush the Yidden there. And what happened in the end is that one mountain had protrusions, one mountain had indentations, and the two mountains came in together. They closed in together, and they crushed the Meridian on the inside. Then there was this major miracle when Mechames Oig was Akartura. Rashi brings us in the end of Parshas Chukas from the Gemara in Brachas, where it says that Oig Melech HaBashan said, how big is Machane Yisrael? 3 parsa. I'll take a mountain that's 3 parsa big, and I'll just crush the Yiddish people. So what he did is he ripped out a mountain that was 3 parsa big. But then what happened was I think it was locusts that climbed in the middle and weakened the middle of the mountain, and the mountain fell onto his head, and he couldn't get himself out. In the meantime, came Moshe Rabbeinu, who was 10 amas tall, and took a stick that was 10 amas long, and jumped up 10 amas in the air, and hit him in his bottom of his leg, in his ankle, and he killed Oig. So remember, he had a guy, a giant that's big enough that he could pick up a mountain that's 3 parsa big, and his ankle is 30 amas off the ground, and yet Moshe Rabbeinu was able to kill him. So these are 2 huge miracles. This should have brought out by the Yidden the opposite results. A very good, upstanding conduct. So the person, the Ben Chamesh, is asking, I open up the Gemara, I understand the trick, but how did the Yidden get even into that marketplace to be able to be lured in like they were? Therefore Rashi references the Sifri, referring to a Sifri that is connected to what is discussed in Chelek. And which Sifri is this? In Sifri in Parshas Balak state, in Sifri in Parshas Balak, it's actually, I wrote it down over here, Kuf Lamed Aleph Beis, where it actually tells the whole story like it doesn't pay the Chelek. But before it tells us the story of Parshas Chelek, it tells us that the Yidden went to Muhammad and Sichem Ve'eg, and they brought in all of the loot from Oig. And then it says over there, Mishen Ismalu Yisrael Min Abiza, when the Yidden got filled up, satiated from the loot, from Muhammad Sichem Ve'eg, Hischilu Mevazim Es Abiza. They were disrespecting, they were destroying the loot. Mekarim ksus umashlichim, they would rip a garment and throw it away. Mekarim be'ema umashlichim, they would rip up an animal and would throw it away. All they wanted was gold and silver. So here they went after Sichem Ve'eg, they had so much materialism that it became meaningless to them. All they wanted was more gold and more silver. Das heißt, as the Greise Bize von der Milchama, the great loot, that they got from the war had geirim given it caused. As the Eden zone zayin in a matzah from Vayishman Yeshurim. The Eden should be in a state of, this is a reference to Parshas Ha'azinu, where it says that when Yeshurim, when Eden are fat, are satiated, when they have a lot of gashmias, ubemeles the tetzayis terfun vayivot, then the outcome is that they kick back, they rebel. As dasat saf their future, their nidgut and when kishlan achet. This is what led ultimately to the inappropriate conduct and the fall of this the Aveda. In other words, if you go through the Rashi, it starts out like this: you can't win the Yidden begashmias because their strength, with Hashem's help, is impenetrable. You can't win the Yidden beruchnias because we see that even the Mitzrim or Yaris Dvar Hashem could not overpower the Yidden. I have one eitzah for you. The eitzah is Elakeim Shalelu Sei Nezimahu. If you're going to say, it's never going to work. So he says, look in Perek Chelek. They had this huge, elaborate scheme that drew the Yidden in. And if you're going to ask, it still won't work. How are the Yidden going to even end up over there to be able to fall into this trap? The answer is, the Yidden fell, so to speak, after the Biza of Sichin V'Oig, where they became so immersed in materialism that it was Vayishman, Yeshurun, Vayivot, and because of that weakened their spiritual resolve, and therefore they ended up in the shuk of Nesheyu b'nai Smoyav, and from there, this elaborate scheme lured them in and caused them to sin, and that was their downfall. Siv Zayin von Yena Shal Teresh Pirish Rashi, something from the deeper secrets, from the deeper understanding of this Rashi. Am Melchemes Midyan gefindt men, as der Eibishter hat gesagt, Nekoim Nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'ez ha-Midyanim. The Eibishter tells Moshe Rabbeinu, take revenge for the Yidden from the Midyanim. Moshe Rabbeinu b'shasa hat ibegegeben dem Tzivay, and Moshe Rabbeinu conveyed this command to the Yidden. Hat gesagt, laseist Nikmas Hashem b'Midyan. He says we have to take revenge for Hashem against Midyan. Nit Nikmas b'nei Yisrael, not the Nekama of the Yidden. Is Mevayer der Tata. So the Rebbe's father, Hagoin Reb Levi Yitzchak, explains this year Shabbos Parshas Matos is the Chedesh Menachem Ov, which is the Chedesh of the Yartzeit of the Rebbe's father. So the Rebbe's father explains the reason for this difference. As the Eibishter is medaktik al kveden shal Yisrael. The Eibishter is careful to defend the honor of the Yidden. When Moshe Rabbeinu is medaktik al kveden shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Moshe Rabbeinu is careful to defend the covet of the Eibishter. When all derech zeh is mevayer was the Eibishter in sein Tzivui. And similarly over there in Likutei Levi Yitzchak, he explains why the Eibishter hat maktim given in Parshas Truma, die Kruvim far dem Oren, und in Parshas Nosei wer der Mond dem Oren far die Kruvim. Now, this is referring to two psukim. In Parshas Truma there's a pasuk, von der Yadati l'chasham, v'dibarti itcha me'al ha'kaperes, mi'bein shnei ha'kruvim, asher al arein ha'edus. So the word kruvim is mentioned before the Oren. In Parshas Nosei there's a pasuk, u'vavoy Moshe eloi el moyed, ledaber itoi, v'yishma es ha'koyel midaber elav me'al ha'kaperes, asher al arein ha'edus, mi'bein shnei ha'kruvim. So the word Orein comes before the word Kruvim. Now I did open up the Likutei Levi Yitzchak and I didn't learn it, so therefore I didn't understand, and I don't know why it's mentioned here in the Sikha, how it adds to the understanding of the Sikha. But this concept is discussed in Likutei Levi Yitzchak, where he also discusses, over there he actually discusses the mezuzah and the mashkef, when the Yidden were going out of Mitzrayim. One place says mezuzah before mashkef, another place says mashkef before mezuzah. And it also explains Nikos b'nei Yisrael, unless it's Nikos Hashem b'Midyan. So the Rebbe's father already explained the fact that the Eibishter is defending the covet of the Yidden, and the Moshe is defending the covet of the Eibishter. But on this, the Rebbe asks a question. Why do you find this concept of the Eibishter defending the Yidden and Moshe defending the Eibishter? Why do you find this by this inyan, by the story of the Mechemes Midyan, and not by any of the other mitzvahs in the Torah? Later as Bar in Pirush Rashi now. But however, once you have this explanation in Rashi, is as Mavur, it's understood. The Milchama from Midyan with the Eden is bestanden in zwei Yefanim. The Milchama of Midian against the Yidden, or the Yidden against Midian, consisted of two elements. Aleph, sie haben gewollt Milchama halten nun umbringen Eden behessen lazakum nikos b'nei Yisrael. They wanted to destroy the Yidden, and therefore we have the words Nikos b'nei Yisrael because it was against the Yidden. Base, the other element was the Eitzah was Bilam at Gegeben Elokeim shel Elu Sein Zima. That the Eitzah that Bilam gave, which was that the Eibishter abhors promiscuity, and entgegen dem is the Inyan for Nikmas Hashem. So both are true. The war of Midian against Yidden was against the Yidden and it was against Hashem. Und der Riber, der Eibishter was mit Dakte B'Chayden Shal Yisrael is von die zwei Matgit Nikos b'nei Yisrael. The Eibishter who is careful, who defends the dignity, the honor of the Yidden. So of the two, he emphasizes the Nikama of Yidden. Their Kavanah to bring Yidden, their intent, which was to destroy the Jewish people. When Moshe Rabbeinu was medaktik HaKodesh al HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Moshe Rabbeinu, who is careful to defend the kavod of Hashem, is madgish nikmas Hashem. He emphasizes the nekama for Hashem as eichzer umbringen Eden is given durch der Peule kegen Elokeim shel Elu v'seine zimu bis zu machshol sein zein avodah zarah b'alpa'er. That this was something that the way they wanted to destroy the Yidden was by going against the Eibishter, and they ultimately caused that the Yidden should be nichshol, should stumble with avodah zarah. So not only was it Zima, which is something that the Eibishter hates, but it was also avodah zarah, which is also something that is against Hashem. So, and this is why we find this idea, this shinui, by Milchemes Midian and not by any other tzivuyim, because by Milchemes Midian there was something against the Yidden and against Hashem. So here was a place where we could emphasize this idea of the Eibishter defending the honor of the Yidden, and Moshe Rabbeinu defending the honor of the Eibishter. Now, please, as ich move with Hashem, is a farish of Nikmas Hashem, Sha'imid Kineged Yisrael, Kilemid Kineged Kadosh Baruch Hu, and this also understand what Rashi says, and the word Nikmas Hashem is someone who stands up against the Yidden. It's as if he stands up against Hashem. Because the Torah sagt us, Davka Mechames Midyan, the Torah teaches this to us, by Mechames Midyan, weil in dem hat man gesehen, as in Zeir Ufstein neged Yisrael is given stellen sich neged Hashem, because this is where we saw that standing up against the Yidden was standing up against Hashem by machshel sein Yidden mit Zima und durch avodah zarah, by causing the Yidden to stumble with znus and also with avodah zarah. Now we go all the way back to the beginning. When the Rebbe sagt the Torah da in Parshas Matos Davke mit Dvar Bilam, and this is why the Torah, he didn't ask this question earlier, he just pointed it out, that in Balak he says L'cha Yatzecha, and here he says Dvar Bilam. Now he explains why. Now we understand why Torah used the word Dvar Bilam, nicht nur Atzas Bilam. Warum das geht zu verstehen, the Mechufa from Mechames Midyan, because by saying Dvar Bilam, we have to find out what was Dvar Bilam. Dvar Bilam was that you can't win them, not Gashmi, it's not Beruchni, the only way you could win them is by going against the Eibishter, because Elokeim shel Elu Sein Zimu. Versus Nikmas Avayu, Nikmas b'nei Yisrael, which the purpose of the Mimit Chemes of Midian was to hurt the Eibishter and to hurt the Yidden. Now that you understand, now it says B'dvar Bilam, now you can understand what the point of the Milchama was, and now you understand and why Moshe Rabbeinu was so upset when they allowed the Nekevos to remain alive.